Okay, good evening, good afternoon. It's right around that. My name is Andrew Fitzgerald. I'm the Dean of the Honors College. I'm the Director of the Institute for Advancing American Values. My job is simply to introduce you to the President of the University, Dr. Marlene Tromp. Dr. Tromp has been committed to Boise State Listens, Idaho Listens, the Institute for the past 2 years to really be a model for what a university should be up to, which is open inquiry, differing perspectives, hearing from people of different backgrounds, and commitments. And so I don't want to give, I could read a huge list of accomplishments. Dr. Tromp's a published author. She's obviously the president of the university. She's held positions at Arizona State University, University of California, Santa Cruz, and of course the last 4 years here at Boise State. But really, I just want her to come up and be in front of you all to welcome you to this event, to thank our students. Following Dr. Tromp, Dr. Alan Dalton will come up and speak about kind of the logistics for the event, and then we'll get right to it. So please join me in welcoming the president of the university, Dr. Marlene Tromp.
Hi, y'all. Maybe we should try that one more time because you guys are going to have to be listening for a while first. So let's do a little something participatory. Hey, good evening, everyone. Good evening. I am so delighted to be here. This event is truly important to me. And it's important to me for a lot of reasons. It's important to me because it really is an emblem for what universities should be, which is a place for the exchange of complex ideas and openness to learn from people who think differently from you, a willingness to engage. We are seeing a sad deterioration of that willingness across this country. And to me, that feels grave. And in higher education, we should be providing a beacon for that work to carry on, for people to encounter ideas that they've never encountered before. I grew up in a small town in Wyoming before the internet. Now, I think saying just one of those things is not quite enough because I didn't even have access to perspectives that looked really different from mine. It was beyond when there were more than just 3 channels. That was when I was younger. But I didn't get an opportunity even to learn what people outside of my own community thought, how they felt. I lived in such a small world, and I loved Wyoming, but I couldn't wait to leave. Not because I didn't want to be there, but because I wanted to encounter the rest of the world. We have the privilege in this cultural moment to encounter ideas and perspectives from so many people. And tonight, what we're going to have the opportunity to do is to hear from our community, to hear different perspectives from our community so we can encounter those ideas. I am so proud of this programming and for the way it represents us as a university, and I am so proud of the people who are here to speak tonight for having the willingness to come forward in a moment when we don't often talk to people across every conceivable line. To have the courage to come forward and speak and to be present here in themselves before you, with their ideas and values before you, seems extraordinary. I want to thank philanthropist Greg Carr, who helped make all of this work possible in the last several years, and Dean Finstuen for his leadership for this institute. Because to our way of thinking at Boise State, what it means to be American is to encounter all of those ideas, to engage all of those ideas, to be willing to think and explore and learn. And I hope tonight will be some of that for all of you. Thank you, Dean Finstuen.
Hello, I'm Alan Dalton. I'm a faculty fellow with the Institute and also emeritus faculty with the economics department. Welcome to Boise State Listens. This is one of several programs of the Institute. Tonight's Boise State Listens is a program meant for us to practice reverent listening. To listen without worrying about, without thinking about how we're going to respond. The program is being recorded by Idaho Public Television, and they are preparing a documentary on the Idaho Listens Project, which is sort of a overarching concept within which Boise State Listens is a part. Our speakers, who will be telling their own stories in their own words, will help in telling those stories by Nancy Buffington, and we want to thank her for her assistance. Our student speakers are from diverse geographic, socioeconomic backgrounds, different majors, different political opinions. Each will speak for about 5 to 7 minutes in response to the question, what do you value and why? At the end of the first 5 speakers, we'll take a 10-minute break to contemplate the messages we've heard. And then we'll follow with the last 4 speakers. And then when all of the speakers have finished, then we'll thank all of them with applause. But before we get there, your job and my job is to hold our applause. A nod's okay, a tear's okay, a chuckle is okay, but no overt demonstrations of approval or disapproval. Be silent and respectful as we listen. Be curious as we listen. Be gracious and, most importantly, charitable as we listen. That's a hard job, but I think we can manage to do that. It'll help to get some of our energy out. So let's start with a round of applause for the courage of these student speakers in sharing their stories with us tonight. I'll introduce our first speaker in each part of the program, and then each student will introduce themselves after the first speaker in each part. With that, our first speaker is Marco Ovando.
Before we get started, let's start off on the right note. Zanku Yeka de Noana, na Marco Ovando Naniha, Nambia Marcela McKinney, na Apa Francisco Ovando, na Dosowiha Zoovich, Nimana, Nyansopo Tuvia Yosoyoi Koyoi Dikida, Soy Koya Etoka Numa, Nakani Tokobadi, Bina Kanakati Atopoi Boise State University, Nimbai Boise, Idaho. Now, before anyone assumes anything, you're right. You were cursed. I'm totally kidding, of course, but what was actually spoken is the historic languages that were and continue to be spoken right here in the Boise Valley. You see, I am a descendant of the Shoshone and Paiute people that continue to call this beautiful slice of abundance and opportunity home. But home is also my small rural community that sits cozy in the valley on the Idaho-Nevada border on the Duck Valley Indian Reservation. I live and go to school here at Boise State as a political science major, but that's pretty obvious. You might wonder why I went through that exhaustive introduction, an introduction that at times becomes senseless sounds to those who have heard it 1,000 times back home. An introduction, as mentioned earlier, may sound like an ancient spell being cast, but it is this introduction that empowers me to make space through the connection to my culture that at one time was almost systematically eradicated under inhumane policies and malicious law and intent. And taking space and sharing my thoughts is something I have grown to fully embrace and utilize and share with you in this room. This wasn't always the case, though. I remember many moments in my childhood where I would get scolded for talking back or sharing my thoughts with adults and elders in my community. For a child to be seen and not heard is a value taken seriously back home. This idea isolated and silenced my voice that I was so eager to share with everyone. But it was in that period of silence I learned how to use my voice as an act of rebellion. A rebellion against my family norms, a rebellion against my community, and a rebellion against this system. So I spoke out, and I spoke out often and oftentimes very loudly. On a brisk fall day in September of 2016, standing halfway on the rigid cold steps of the Idaho Capitol building, I stood timidly before a group of 300 from all walks of life, primarily from indigenous communities, with a microphone in my hand. You really got yourself into some shit this time, man, I was telling myself in my head. I had never spoken to a crowd before, and to be called upon to do just that on the spot was overwhelming. After a couple of seconds of hesitation, a voice emerged in my head. This is your home. Take back your space. Remember your ancestors. An image of Sarah Winnemucca, a Northern Paiute woman who became the first Native American woman author and the first Paiute woman to testify before Congress, and also my grandmother on my maternal side, came into play. I raised the mic to my mouth, and once the words came out, a flood of words inspiring about community, protecting the values we hold dear, and holding our culture true to our hearts came out. I didn't hold back, and when I finally came to towards the end, I realized that the support of the community, my relatives, uplifted that space into a warm feeling of pride, hope, and a vision to serve my community. It was either that or the sun finally coming into play and sitting high enough to burn my face, but who really knows at that point? When I'm brought back to my childhood, I felt brushed aside and told to sit down and be quiet. I think back to that moment on those Capitol steps often when I feel unheard or unseen. To that time of holding the mic and feeling timid but ready. I think back to that feeling when I sit in classrooms with people who do not look like me, colleagues who don't always share the same values or ideas as I do. And this feeling inspires my work in advancing Indigenous recognition and equitable initiatives to students where often I am in workspaces surrounded by administrative PhDs and campus leaders who think that just because they have a degree means that they know more than me in something they have never experienced, whereas I have lived it. My ancestors, like Sarah, took space for advocating for the humane and just law for the betterment of all people. She took space and passed that trait down through my grandmothers, my mother, and now me. I continue to make space, not just for myself, but for others. Namarko naniha, nadoso hi zovich namana, yan sopo tuvia koya soy koya tekera, koya toka nema, na aishin nakaya toka wipa. This is my time to take my space. Hishaya. Thank you.
My name is Calvin Dorr, and I have a lot to be grateful for. I've grown up with the privilege of having my parents and grandparents still alive and married. I haven't had to experience much tragedy or gone through any discrimination. I understand because of that my life is pretty easy compared to others. And because of that, I value gratitude. But even with all these blessings, I still struggle. I struggle with fear of failure, perfectionism, and I feel that because I have this perfect life that I should be perfect as well, and I'm not. When I feel that way, I open this shoebox, which I keep in my room, that's filled with cards, notes, and photos from the people that I love, and it reminds me of how blessed I should be, or how blessed I am. I'd like to share some of the items that have helped me get through these times. One unique item is Oh, the Places You'll Go, which has a letter or a note from every teacher I had from kindergarten to my senior year of high school. But one note was actually written by my middle school janitor named Mario. And he is very important to me, and I don't think a lot of people know who their middle school janitor is, but he was the man who taught me how to play basketball. When I was in second grade, I would go to my mother's school, and he would take me out of her classroom and taught me how to play basketball in the dusty Pawalu gym. I would warm up with 3 shots on the left, 3 shots on the right, and 3 shots down the middle. He taught me the game that I love. He taught me how to shoot, pass, and we developed a very strong connection around basketball. Once I got to high school, he still would come to every game that I had, even after a long day of cleaning or cleaning bathrooms and classrooms. My junior year, I didn't get off the bench much, but still he was there, screaming, "Let's go Tigers," at every tip-off. And in this book, he wrote, "Calvin, you are such a bright and talented young man. I can't wait to see the places you'll go. Thank you for putting up with me for all these years and for all the laughs. Mario, aka Coach. Don't forget me when you make it to the NBA." Now, I'm far from NBA talent, intramural at best, but I'm still remember and look back on those memories with him very fondly. He was a great role model. He was a great role model of kindness and hard work, which is the same type of role model I've strived to be for my younger sister. I've been given a lot of things in life, but my greatest gift is Adeline Eve. On the day that she was born, I was almost 3 years old, and I walked into the hospital and asked, "Where's my baby?" And since that day, she's been my best friend. I try to show her the power of good work ethic and optimism, but sometimes I make mistakes. I'm not perfect. I actually missed the deadline for my Boise State scholarship, and I had to defer a semester. And I remember the day I found out, I was in my bed, and I was all curled up in my blanket, crying on my Zoom meeting for my AP statistics class because I felt like a failure. That year, my sister gave me this card, and inside it, she wrote, "Happy 18th birthday, Calvin. I can't believe you're finally an adult, but that doesn't mean you're my parent. You are my favorite person because you care about me, make me laugh, you inspire me, and lead the right way. I'm so happy I get to spend another 6 months with you. Thank you for making my childhood so awesome and unforgettable. I can't wait to see what comes next in your life, and I promise I'll be right by your side." Along with it, she attached some photos of me holding her on the day that she was born, as well as like this little wristband, which I still like to wear. At that time, I needed strength, and she was the one that offered it to me. Well, I thought I was a role model for her. She's just as much a role model for me. That summer, I got a job, and I worked for 6 months before starting school. And during this time, I received a letter from my grandparents. In it, my grandma wrote, "Congratulations on your first job. We are proud of you and know you will excel when you get to Boise. Hope to see you this summer, but if you have to work, that comes with being an adult. Enjoy your birthday. Love and prayers, Grandma Super." I was able to go that summer to see Grandpa Joe and Grandma Jan, and I got to drive the boat around the lake and play a lot of cribbage. And I was very excited to spend that time with them, and I decided I'd try to call them weekly, which I've been able to maintain ever since. But I remember I was walking on the Greenbelt one day, just past the Friendship Bridge, and I was talking to my grandma about school and things I had going on. And then she asked me if I had any siblings, which my sister means she's the most important person to me. And when your grandma asks you if you have any siblings, it's pretty hard to explain that to her. So my grandma suffers from Alzheimer's, and her memory is getting worse, which is part of the reason that I continue to call. I'm grateful that I can still pick up the phone and call him, so I'll continue to do that. Sometimes I look in the box for this card because even though she's lost parts of her memory, I'm reminded that my Grandma Jan's love is as strong as ever. I value gratitude because it drives me to succeed. It puts my challenges into perspective, and when I open this box, I find the best version of myself inside. I'd like to end with 3 things that I'm grateful for, which I write in my little journal each night. I'm grateful for my friendships and family. I'm grateful for my grandparents, and I'm grateful to share these stories about the people that I love. Thank you.
When I'm asked to introduce myself to a room of people, as I'm doing with you now, I usually say 3 things. 1, my name, Andrea Teresa Martinez. 2, that I'm a university student. And 3, that I'm a journalist. Notice I didn't say anything about my political leanings or personal biases, yet that 3rd point seems to be the equivalent of that for everyone in the room. People here, young person working in media, and they fill in those blanks themselves. You see, the 4th, but equally important point that I tend not to bring up in a room full of people, as I am doing now, is that I am a practicing Catholic. But instead of admitting to that, I let them keep that first impression of me. Not because it benefits me or because I think it's more accurate, but because sometimes that revelation invites questions that I'm not quite ready to answer. I was born and raised Catholic in Guadalajara, Jalisco. I grew up with at least one picture of La Virgen in every room in the house, and still pass by bakeries and corner shops with the images of Our Lady of Guadalupe carved into the cement walls. For as long as I can remember, I've always taken the approach of, I'm not going to tell you that I'm Catholic, but I'm not going to say no if you ask, which growing up kind of felt like cheating. My classmates in my media classes don't really know that I'm Catholic, and the friends that I see in Bible study don't know I'm a journalist. I get to enjoy both settings, but just get real quiet whenever anything mildly political comes up on either side. I thought I'd be able to get away with that mindset in my career. I remember signing up for my first journalism class and thinking, I just won't write about politics. How hard can that be? Fast forward 2 years, a dozen media classes later, and I find myself as the intern reporter for the Idaho Statesman. I was a general assignment reporter during the summer of 2022, and I loved my job. I wrote about projects for people experiencing housing insecurity, talked to local pharmacies about how they're dealing with the national labor shortage, and covered the opening of a new Ukrainian refugee center here in Idaho. I started telling my Catholic friends that I was a journalist because I was proud of the work that I was doing, of the important stories that I was telling. Most had neutral reactions, but others made comments that didn't sit quite right with me. I recall one moment not too long ago where I proudly introduced myself as the editor-in-chief of my university's student newspaper, The Arbiter, and the young man shaking my hand said to me, I don't read that stuff, it's biased. I knew our newspaper's mission was nonpartisan, and I was convinced I'd mastered what that meant in my own avoidance of politics in my own writing, though I learned the hard way that politics doesn't simply stop at the door of the courtroom or the Capitol. I saw it everywhere. First as a student, then as the news editor of my university student newspaper, then as editor-in-chief. I saw it in what we reported, how we reported it, why we reported it. It seeped into words, pictures, attributions. It betrayed an alliance in something as trivial as whether or not we decided to capitalize a single word. How do you speak for an entire newsroom with the switch of a caps lock? It's either on or off, blue or red, journalist or Catholic. But where the switch broke was where I was suddenly thrown into a fight I wasn't ready for and a question I still had no desire to answer. It was that same summer, Friday, June 24th, 2022, when I found myself in the middle of a battlefield. They didn't send me out to the Capitol in person. I was just the intern after all. I sat behind my laptop screen and called different organizations to get comments from the protesters and watched my news feed split in half. people who mourned their own futures, and people celebrating the futures of those who had not yet been born. Journalism, as I knew it, changed before my eyes. The truth that I'd once considered subjective became a competition of who could claim the most pain from it. I'd reached the end of a tightrope, and all that was left was choosing in which direction I'd let myself fall. It was on that day I finally allowed myself to speak the question I'd so adamantly avoided. What if I can't be both? That question sat with me through my first semester of senior year and followed me to a journalism conference all the way in Washington, D.C. It was scribbled into my agenda for the last day, a workshop called God in Journalism. Except it wasn't a workshop, but more of a round table. And when it was my turn to speak, I bared it all in front of around 26 strangers. I told them the truth, that my job was a constant battle with my conscience, that I signed and published stories that I didn't always agree with, and that it was hard. I don't remember the name of the participant who spoke after me, nor do I remember what paper she worked for, or what kind of reporting she did, or if she was even Catholic herself. All I remember were her words to me. As Christians, we are called to give a voice to the voiceless. And do you know what I said in return? Nothing. I was angry. I was angry at an answer that didn't actually make anything easier, didn't actually tell me how to honor both parts of myself without reducing them to a career choice. If I were to see her again now, I would thank her. Her words weren't what I wanted to hear, but they were what I needed to hear. An honest, objective truth, something I'd been craving for without realizing it. Sometimes it feels like I'm still in the middle of that battlefield, and in many ways I am. But her words stick with me. And looking back at that seemingly inescapable tightrope now, I think about Proverbs chapter 31, verses 8 through 10. Speak out on behalf of the voiceless and for the rights of all who are vulnerable. Speak out in order to judge with righteousness and to defend the needy and the poor. Never in my life did I think I would look at a Bible verse and say, what a beautiful way to describe journalism. I work hard for that description to show up in how I write stories of unemployed persons recovering from substance abuse, children's programs concerned by rising hunger in Boise, Idahoans who feel trapped from unequal access to health care. Because under the politics, the rivalries, and even the news itself, there is an underlying mission to let the voiceless be heard and to share the truth. And that mission is quickly turned into a motivation, one that tells me I'm here for a reason and that I can do good here, even when it's hard. Do not be mistaken. This isn't me compromising my beliefs or letting one set of values win over the other. It's me saying that if you think one voice has to be silenced for the other to be heard, then you're having the wrong conversations. I believe that being a Catholic has made me a better journalist, and that in a sense, being a journalist has made me a better Catholic. And I believe that both have given me a voice, and taught me how to share it with others. Thank you.
If I were to ask everyone in this room to stand up one by one and guess my race or ethnicity, we would probably end up with quite the array of answers. And everyone, myself included, would be a bit uncomfortable. Now, if my hair was up in a bun where it appears to be straight, more people might be confident in labeling me as white. And if my hair was down and curly like it is today, and I'd happened to spend a lovely week in Hawaii, tanned to a crisp, we'd all be a little more perplexed. Is he white? Latino? I get a sprinkling of South American, Middle Eastern, and Asian countries as well. Really, I've heard them all. Now this would of course seem like a ridiculous exercise with no real purpose. But is it really that ridiculous? I guarantee that by the time each of us speakers have set our papers down on the podium, you have already, whether subconsciously or consciously, played a version of this game in your head. In addition to race, you've also probably noticed our attire, our gender, our age, and any number of other visual cues that could help you prepare for what we might say. Our biases, past experiences, society at large all tell us what to expect based on these external markers. For example, if I clearly looked white, you might assume that I love to ski and have an embarrassingly low tolerance for spicy foods. And if I clearly looked Indian and I'm talking the giant subcontinent, you might assume that I'm pursuing a STEM degree or have at least one family member that owns a gas station convenience store. If I clearly look black, you might assume that I follow the NBA or feel the need to tell me about your opinion of Kanye West. But what happens when how you view someone doesn't line up with who they are? Good evening, everyone. My name is Ben Sherman, and I am many things, but racially speaking, I'm the product of a white father from Washington State and a Kolkata-born Black and Indian mother. I usually just identify as mixed or multiracial, but I didn't always see myself this way. Now, I'm sure that nearly every person of color in this room and in your lives can tell you the exact moment that they realized they weren't white. That moment they realized that this country wasn't really stood up for them. For many, this othering usually occurs at a young age, after they get called a name, get made fun of for having ethnic foods in their packed lunch, or miss out on playing Prince Charming in the school play because it just wouldn't be realistic. For whatever reason, most likely due to my white passing appearance and a whitewashed way in which my mother, and consequently my brother and I were raised, I didn't have this moment of realization until I was almost 18 years old. And I still remember it vividly. I sat in my senior year English class and looked eagerly at the paper that Mr. Singer had slapped on my desk. My eyes flipped through the pages as I scanned the red marks. Suddenly, I saw a note at the end of my essay that made my cheeks flush bright red, a hue those correction marks must have envied. It read, "As a white male, we shouldn't speak for others, but stand with. Come speak to me." A legitimate and rogue critique, right? Except, I'm not white. To this day, I will never forget that sick feeling of being so misunderstood while also misunderstanding myself so deeply. With just one scribbled sentence, my identity had been stolen. With that dreaded pen, he stole the identity given to me by my Kolkata-born mother. He stole my Indian grandmother talking in her weathered accent, tarnished by years of living in the United States. He stole her wrinkled caramel hands stirring a simmering pot of chicken curry, and my grandfather's curly hair and dark Caribbean skin. To be fair, he was kind enough to leave the white half, but the rest flew away like dandelion fluff in the wind, leaving only the stem of a flower, lacking in beauty and confidence. It's hard sometimes feeling so diluted, like you're not enough of one thing to be anything. It's also exhausting, spending countless hours reflecting and exploring what it means to be you, and still being left perplexed. It's a journey of self-exploration that I know will last a lifetime, a fact made clear by my own mother, who still, to this day, is figuring out what it means to be a biracial woman. In all its hardships, I have only now begun to understand how my mixed-race identity has influenced just about every part of how I navigate life. It has inspired me to go into advertising, where I can live in the middle of creative storytelling, psychology, and data analytics. It means that every time I take a Myers-Briggs personality test, I land right in the middle on just about every metric. It means as a student-athlete and member of the Honors College here at Boise State, I've been the jock and the nerd, just as concerned with my athletic performance as my GPA. I value nuance, the ability to live between worlds, to see people for who they are, not just who you assume they are, to have the courage to build your identity, beliefs, and values in a way that makes sense to you and only you. I see an America today that leaves little room for nuance, an America where everyone must put themselves into categories that often require compromise. I challenge everyone in this room to think about how they can prioritize nuance in their lives. And if we all do that, I believe that we will have a more well-rounded, empathetic, and cohesive world. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Roman Rousselet, and I want to share about a newly discovered value of mine, a value called struggle. Yes, I know, that's not what you expected I'd say. It's not a very sexy value, not one that you would even consider to be a value. It didn't feel like a value to me at first either, because it involved a lot of discomfort. But now that time has gone by, I have learned to value it, because it has taught me the most about myself. I have been talking for about 30 seconds now, and I'm guessing that you have all noticed that I am not from here. Yes, I have a little accent, and it originates from the south of France. I was raised in a tiny town named Sainte-Marie-de-la-Mer. It's about 2 hours away from Marseille, if you've ever heard of that. This little town is like no other. Horses and bulls animate the view, and flamingos bring colors to the dull landscapes. Growing up, I spent my free time riding my horse on the beach, galloping in the sea, and chasing flamingos in the marshes. What a lovely place, you might be thinking. And don't get me wrong, it is a very, very nice place. But for many reasons, including social constraints and the political climate, I never really felt at home there. And even mentioned that I was gonna leave from a very young age. So when I turned 18 years old, I graduated high school, and 2 days later, I was on a plane. I traveled a lot, I've moved a lot, met a lot of different people, including a very handsome Idahoan that has followed me all along. There are many stepping stones in my journey. A year on Maui in Hawaii to a few years in Bozeman, Montana. The little French girl experienced it all. In fall 2019, after several cold winters in Bozeman, Montana, I wanted to change things up once again, so we moved to Oahu. At the time, we thought that Hawaii would be our forever home. But then COVID-19 happened shortly after and made us change our mind. You see, when there's a crisis like this one, living on a small island with counted resources is very different than living on the mainland. We didn't have very many hospitals, and our medical workforce was skim. When the islands shut down in February of 2020, what we thought to be 2 weeks to kill the curve turned into countless months. A year later, restrictions, mandates, solitude, and fear had really affected everybody. People were turning on their neighbors for the simple acts of everyday living. Those people we knew got reported to the police and fined $5,000 because they took their dog out to go to the bathroom. The law enforcement were really conflicted on who to serve, and they also gave countless $5,000 fines to homeless people for being out on the streets during a shutdown. To be fair with you, Hawaii was not what we thought it was anymore. The sense of aloha and humanity had totally vanished. And this once paradise didn't feel like a paradise anymore, and it didn't feel like home either. You see, I've always been a very driven person, but these many changes forced me to change my perspective on life. In late 2021, classes at the University of Hawaii were still online, and I was told that I would not be allowed to attend in-person classes nor finish my degree in environmental sciences unless I got 3 shots of the COVID-19 vaccine. To me, this ultimatum was not one to take lightly, and it took me a lot of reflection and meditating to see what I should do next. I had nothing against people's decision to take the COVID-19 vaccine, and have and still respect anybody's choice to do so. But unfortunately, over in Hawaii, that mentality of choice did not exist. And this is when I realized that I was not in the right place anymore. So in March 2022, we moved back to Idaho, my fiance's home state. When we moved, I didn't have very much faith in the school system anymore. And despite knowing that I would finish my undergraduate degree, I had doubts on whether or not I would work in my field of study. After a few weeks at Boise State, however, my outlooks had changed. I was surrounded by very passionate teachers who wanted me to succeed. I was sharing classes with students who respected one another no matter what. And after several years of uncertainty, I was finally able to study the subject that I'm passionate about in an in-person setting. I know I've lived in a lot of places that were lovely, but that doesn't mean that they were perfect. Each and every one of them involved a fair amount of struggle, in fact. The struggle that I lived in Hawaii gave me an opportunity to rediscover my drive, my goals, and my visions. I didn't realize it in the moment, but these times that seemed meaningless were actually incredibly valuable and helped me define who I really am today. Without these struggles, I wouldn't have moved back to Idaho, and I wouldn't get to be in front of all of you here today. I am therefore here to remind you that hard times are valuable and that they should be appreciated just as much as joyful times. Struggle is uncomfortable, but it is the only value that offers you the choice and the chance to be better, to grow stronger, and to really understand what you stand for. Thank you.
We'll take a 10-minute break and resume precisely at 5:38 according to my watch. 4 more speakers, and our first speaker is David Newton.
Hi, my name is David Newton. I am an MBA candidate in the Kobe department. I want you to imagine working a 12-hour shift. It's a hot day and you got to walk home and all you want to do is go to sleep. I'm sure we've all been there. So one day, me and my 2 buddies are walking home and I'm walking along the fence line and they're kind of out in the street and then a rock hits. I hit the ground and dirt's in my mouth and I'm trying to figure out what's going on and my ears are ringing. By the time I look up, I see my one buddy on the ground. My other buddy, who's twice the size that I am, with a full pack and his weapon in his hands, is taking off running because he's so scared. This is the day that I identify when perseverance is going to change for me. Now we jump ahead to 2015 when I retire medically out of the military. I identify that I want to start my education. My mother says, hey, you know, you're kind of broken a little bit. At this point, I had become 270 pounds. I was using a cane, and I knew I was physically broken, but I could go to school. I could use my GI Bill. I'm a smart individual. Because you see, I was an Intel professional. And so I wanted to go back to school and get back into the world. You see, I'd learned what perseverance was growing up. I'd been taught that a drop of water will make it into the river. And that drop of water will make it to the ocean one day by some of my influencers, Winnie the Pooh and Christopher Robin. And my mom had made sure that I'd never give up. And then later in life, after my father had passed, I had two men who would make sure I'd never give up, and that was my grandparents. They told me it's okay to fail. It's okay to come to them with any problem, but it's not okay to give up. Then I joined the military, and the military said it's not okay to ever give up. You adapt and you overcome. I was always had somebody looking out for me. But once I was out of the military and I decided to join my colleagues and fellow students in educational pursuits, I was on my own. Now I had to persevere on my own. I had to make my own decisions. So my very first term, I decided that, you know what, I'm not going to do management. I'm not going to do intelligent education or analyst. I'm going to be a veterinarian. I can do this. I'm a smart person. But my very first term, I found out I can't memorize this. Something's going on. What am I doing here? So one day at a community college, which is where I started out, I was on the second floor of the library, sitting in a chair, and I started just panicking. I'm going to have to quit. I can't do this. What is going on? But I had those voices in my head saying, no, you can't quit. You got to keep going. So I did what any 38-year-old veteran would do. I picked up my phone, and I called my mommy. My mother said one great thing to me. She said, hey, you don't have to do that. You can pick anything you want. You have a GI Bill. You have the means to do any kind of education. So I redirected my focus and decided to do a business degree. Let's start there. So baby steps. So I got my associate's degree in business, and I really enjoyed some of my economics classes. And they encouraged me to go for a bachelor's degree. So then I got my bachelor's in bachelor's in business economics. And then those professors were like, hey, you know, you're pretty good at this. How about a master's degree? And I'm like, I don't think I can do that. But they lifted me up, and I got my master's in economics. Not only did I get my master's in economics, I did a thesis, something I never thought I could do. And now I'm in an MBA program. What does this mean? This means that perseverance is important to me, especially when I'm with these young students like you. So many times do I see such great men and women out there that are pushing through, trying, and have such great potential, but every now and then I can see that that we struggle. I struggle every day to make these decisions. Recently, Forbes put out an article about perseverance and the need for our youth today. There's been a greater dropout rate recently in college for the youth and in high school. This has been increased mental health issues. It's also increased the percentages of issues within the younger youth today. The reason this is important to me is because I've had many friends and I've helped teach some classes. We have so many professors and so many types of people in our lives that are willing to help us. I wouldn't be here today if I didn't have the professors, my family, but also my friends and colleagues supporting me to get me where I am today. I could have just stayed there in the dirt and had them carry me out. I'm 100% disabled. I could have just relied on my retirement and not decided to continue with my goals. I'm sure a lot of us wake up in the morning and think, what am I doing? Am I going to make these decisions? I do it every day. But we decide to continue and meet our goals, especially going through the pandemic. The last 2 years has been a struggle, being so disconnected. Just know that you're not alone and that we have so many people out there to help us meet our goals. I'm just so thankful for my professors, my new supervisor, my new part-time job, getting back in the labor force, and especially my roommate. He's really made sure that I'm not alone and not just sitting somewhere playing video games all day. So thank you.
Hi, my name is Taylor Jepson, and my search for truth about myself, about the world, and about other people has taught me to value opposition in all things, playing devil's advocate and arguing both sides of an issue. My first and probably most beneficial experience with this concept came in high school debate. For those of you who don't know a lot about the way that competitive debate works, there are lots of different ways to do it. But the kind that I participated in, there were two debaters arguing one-on-one, and you were assigned a topic to both affirm and negate in equal measure. So sometimes there would be multiple rounds, and each competitor would be assigned a side to prove, switching back and forth between the two in different rounds. So sometimes you'd affirm, and sometimes you'd negate. Not sticking to one side meant that you couldn't just argue what you thought going into the round. You actually had to do some hard thinking about the topic. And if you wanted to win, and we all did, you had to actually prove what you said with evidence that you vetted for accuracy, because if you didn't, your opponent would pick your case apart line by line. We live in a world that never really forces us to confront our own beliefs and honestly, truly, fully argue against them or even prove them with anything beyond our own say-so. If you want to do that, you have to do it yourself, and really it's just easier not to, so most of the time we don't. Debate taught me that if you want to find the truth about something, you first have to acknowledge that there are lots of truths about a thing, some of which you are not going to like. And once you've done that, you can start to sorting out how these pieces fit together and form your beliefs based on that. A relatively simplified example of how to do this would be the issue of guns. We know that more guns means more homicides. We also know that in states with strong gun laws, there are fewer firearm homicides and suicides. That being said, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed, and this is an important right that needs to be protected. Plus, even disregarding that fact, it's not that difficult to get your hands on a gun illegally. For example, in Illinois reported over 15,000 arrests related to illegal firearm possession in 2021. All of the things that I have just stated are facts, derived from peer-reviewed studies and government reports that I have citations for if you'd like to fact-check me. And no, they might not all lend themselves to one side or the other on the gun debate, but that doesn't mean that we can write them off. Instead, we have to operate within the realm of truth and find a solution that will solve the problems they represent. Now, this is easier said than done, but if we don't do that, we're always going to be ignoring something true, and it will come back to bite us later. In the example of guns, those consequences could be pretty drastic. Thousands of deaths, the violation of fundamental rights, and other things. But in other, less dramatic situations, they're still there. If you ignore water dripping through your roof because it's inconvenient to replace the shingles, you're probably going to have to replace your entire ceiling later. But that might make your life easier for the moment, but eventually there are consequences for ignoring the truth. Now, just to clarify, I'm not here to talk about guns or the gun debate. My point is about how to identify truth. And in many, if not most situations, that can really only be done by honestly and completely looking at two sides of a divisive issue. This kind of critical thinking has been essential to me in my life. Figuring out my political beliefs, my religious beliefs, and my beliefs about how to interact with my friends and family. And if I'm being honest, that's meant making some pretty painful decisions at times. Sometimes you come to find out that something you've believed your entire life and built yourself around completely might not be right. And at that point, acting on what is true means changing fundamental parts of yourself. For me, the most drastic of these changes was a change in my religion. The church permeated every single aspect of my life. The clothes I wore, the words I used, the food I ate. but I'd never really questioned what I was being told to do at every turn. When I started asking questions, however, I discovered that views opposing the church and its beliefs had legitimacy, and I discovered that things were not as black and white as they had once seemed. Without that structure of strict and unswerving obedience to an outside director that I'd always known, I am now forced to reevaluate all of my beliefs and justify them to myself using the process that I have just described to you. Why do I think this? Is it right? What is the angle that I'm not considering? And what parts of the things that I was taught are right and which aren't? Because I recognize that even though I do not believe the faith in its entirety, it is not valueless, and there is still truth in there. The value of community, hard work, and dedication to what you think is right, among other things. How can I differentiate between the aspects that are right and true and those that aren't? I don't think that there are words to adequately describe the difficulty of this questioning process. It kind of feels like the rug's been pulled out from under you sometimes. But despite how hard it can be, I am incredibly grateful that I've developed these skills that help me to identify truths, but or even when they're inconvenient, so that I can act in the way that is best, not just for me, but for everyone that I come into contact with. My hope is that by sharing how much I value this process, others, like yourselves, might decide to try it, and we can all find more truth, united in that search, rather than divided.
Well, good evening. My name is Adam Jones. And ever since I was a little kid, I can remember getting in the truck with my dad and my brothers and driving out to the family farm in Emmett, where my grandfather lives. Now, when many people go to visit their grandparents, they might think of warm cookies or maybe story time as children. But my grandfather has always had a slightly different way of showing affection to us: manual labor. Now, there's nothing wrong with that, but it's definitely a little bit different, different to adjust to as a child. But as such, when I became of working age, right around my 7th birthday, whenever we'd go to visit Grandpa, I didn't sit on the carpet and play with my Matchbox cars. Instead, our job was to do whatever it is that he asked. But of all the many times I went out to the farm, there's never been a more vivid and clear memory to me than one hard-and-hell day when we were working in our torn-up farm jeans, our work boots, dirt-stained shirts, and sweat-soaked hats. It was my grandpa, my dad, my older brother Ryan, and I. We were out in the field doing what's known as picking rocks, which it's not a whole hell of a lot to it. It's essentially you're just wandering around a field looking for big rocks that could harm equipment or blocking a furrow. Your job is then to pick up those rocks, bring them to the end of the field. Now, my grandfather, of course, was supervising this process. When I announced in a very childlike manner, "I hate this. I hate the farm. I never want to come back, and I never want to do this again." At that point, my grandfather walked over to me and said some of the most important words I've ever heard him say. He said, "Adam, what I'm teaching you is not something you can ever learn in a classroom, not something you can pick up in a textbook. What I'm teaching you is the value of hard work and learning how to work." And of course, I was something like 11 years old, so his message really didn't hit home to me for a long time. But over the next several years, whenever I'd go out to the farm and I'd complain about greasing desserts on a loader, moving heavy equipment from one field to another, or simply just committing general OSHA violations because Grandpa said so, he again would remind me that everything I was doing was not necessarily just to help him, but it was also to teach me a lesson. And eventually I did get it. You see, my grandfather, he was born at the end of World War II. His parents were of the greatest generation, and he had learned firsthand from them, and then eventually in his own life, the value of hard work. And he was damn sure that his children and grandchildren were going to understand the same appreciation for hard work. So when thinking about today's value, or today's prompt of what do you value and why, a lot of things came to mind. But when I really thought about it, everything that I, or really anyone has ever really achieved in life, has done so because they had to work at it. As such, I deeply believe in the value of manual labor. So as I grew up and began looking for jobs, one of the first jobs I ever had was moving 60 to 80 pound bags of concrete every day at Home Depot. I started working at the beginning of the summer, and the weather here in Idaho that year is consistently above 100 degrees day after day. We did it in COVID masks, which made it even worse. In fact, it got to be so hot that the forklifts would actually sink into the asphalt. I didn't like my job, but I stuck with it. Most of the people that worked in the same position as I did didn't make it through the month of June. Why? They didn't know the value of hard work. They didn't know how to work because they'd never been taught it. They couldn't stand sweating through their clothes and being covered in concrete powder day after day for $11 an hour. While it was tough, it's exactly what I'd been taught my entire life. Fortunately, I don't think that many kids growing up today have been taught the same experience. I value hard work because I know what it's worth. And every day I'm reminded of this in a physical form. My dad grew up with very little means, not as a result of his parents not trying, but as simply as a matter of the reality of the situation. However, over the course of his life, through hard work and endurance, he moved from the fields to the law office. His hard work has made my life better as a result. The work that we do now does not just affect you. It affects everyone that depends on you now and the future. And now, as a result of the effort my dad made when he was my age, I can now focus on the efforts that I'm passionate about, as opposed to concentrating on milking the cows every morning at 3 a.m. because that's what has to be done. As such, I've been able to embark on my own political ambitions, and I got elected to student body president here at Boise State. My job now entails I attend a large number of meetings, respond to emails, and sit in my office day after day. And while I love my job, I always find there's something missing when I come home. A couple months ago, I figured out what my problem was. I was reminded of what I learned as a kid in elementary school. As a kid, I learned about George Washington, the Roman consul Cincinnatus. These individuals, when they were called on by their countrymen to serve, they served their nation, and once they completed their duty, they returned to their country. They voluntarily gave up power, and they returned home to their farms. Now, I'm hell and gone from Cincinnatus and Washington, but I'm also find myself in stark contrast to my 11-year-old self. It used to be a chore to go out to the farm. I hated it. I was in that field, sweating my ass off day after day, and I didn't like it. But now I'd go as far as to say I look forward to it. Standing in a field being covered in sweat and constantly swatting away flies as the sun beats down on me keeps me grounded and helps me remember why it is that I keep working. I value hard work because I know that my actions today will affect how my kids live tomorrow. Will my children do manual labor because they want to or because they have no other choice? I will work hard because I want them to have the same choice I did. My dad and my grandfather did not. Keep working. Thank you.
I have to say, I was a bit caught off guard by a huge wave of emotion as I caught my first glimpse of the snow-covered peaks as my plane descended into Boise on Tuesday morning. At this point in my life, I've lived outside of Idaho longer than I've lived in the state of Idaho during my formative years. But Idaho will always be home to me. When I decided to return to finish my bachelor's degree, I wanted it to come from a university in my home state. And I chose the university from my home state that's not afraid to approach things differently. And I've studied a lot of the things I thought that I would as a Bronco, like finance, marketing, and economics. But I've also learned many profoundly impactful and innovative lessons as well. I like to call them my lessons from the blue turf. And I'd like to share with you today what I think is probably one of the most impactful lessons of all. The story starts when, in the midst of glowing reviews at the end of one of my courses last summer, I received the gift of honest and critical feedback from one of my teammates. One thing that Natalie may want to work on is listening to others. It really happened. I realized that he was right as I thought about it, and that my concern with maintaining my straight-A GPA had led me to be a little pushy with my agenda, my view on how we should approach our group assignments. You see, I had just become an undergraduate fellow through the Institute for Advancing American Values, and I was just beginning to learn the tremendous importance of empathic listening. As an elective choice last fall, I took analytics for design through the College of Innovation and Design, and at a time when many people in our country have stopped listening to each other altogether, I decided to tackle the project of listening head on, and I chose listening as my subject for a semester-long project focusing on a worthy cause. So I set out to research the subject and find answers to my growing list of questions, like, isn't listening automatic? Why am I able to empathically listen at some times and not others? And how often are we distracted in formulating our replies rather than actually listening to what's being said? I was truly amazed at what I found while researching this subject. I learned that listening is an art. It involves vigilance, a focus on understanding, and the elimination of judgment. And I learned that we're biologically predisposed to distraction while listening. We understand language at an amazing rate, averaging close to 450 words per minute. But we speak at a significantly slower rate, and the difference between the two leaves us plenty of time to fill in the gap. Throw in some intense emotions on top of the physical challenge, and no wonder we find ourselves easily distracted and not listening to one another. After looking at existing research, I conducted a bit of my own to see how others felt about the topic. I started by interviewing a university professor, a social worker, a city councilman, and a graphic designer. I heard their frustrations about constant and distracting interruptions from social media and electronic devices. Personal biases and prejudices were also mentioned as barriers that keep people from listening to one another. The city councilman felt that good quality active listening is a rarity. After the interviews, my curiosity was piqued, and I decided to conduct a survey. I was shocked to learn that only 35% of respondents normally listen with empathy or with the intent to understand during intense conversations. But I was encouraged that 87% believed that people could actually learn to be better listeners. By now, you might be asking yourself, why has she become so passionate about learning about listening and improving her listening skill? It's because I've come to believe that listening is a critically important foundation for one of the most important aspects of our lives, our relationships. I've often told my daughter that relationships are what life is really all about. In the end, it's about our relationships and our experiences. I've never heard a story of someone in their last moments of life wishing for material things. The stories that I've heard are about wishing for one more day, one more hour, or one more minute with those that they hold dear. I, for one, would give just about anything to listen to my mother's sweet voice for just one more day. I've come to realize that I was given the gift of an incredible mentor for how to be an empathic listener. My mother listened to me with pride when I told her of my greatest accomplishments, and with compassion, empathy, and love during my biggest challenges, setbacks, and heartbreaks. She's been gone for over a decade now, and I've forgotten many of the words that she said, but I'll never forget how she made me feel and how she was present, fully present, in every conversation. I want to be that kind of listener for my daughter because I'm sure that she'll have some great accomplishments in her own life that she might want to talk about. And I want to be there for her during the challenging times if she just needs to be heard. So what lessons have I learned from all of this research on listening? I've learned that developing the skill of listening takes intention, and that like any skill, improvement comes through practice. The city councilman for my project agreed when he described listening and communication as soft skills that can be improved through learning. I feel like I've learned a lot, but I definitely have more to learn, and I'm excited for the research yet to come. So I'd like to close with an invitation to each of you, and that invitation is this. Please join me as I continue to learn and develop my skill as a listener. As philanthropist Greg Carr advocated at Idaho Listens in September, let's listen to one another and form a fabric of friendship across our great state and our nation. Thank you.
The Institute wants to thank each and every one of you for attending tonight. And now is an appropriate time to give all of our speakers a round of applause. There are refreshments and hors d'oeuvres out in the hallway. Please join us, have conversations with the speakers and with one another, and thank you once again for attending.